John Kurtz with the Kansas City Sports Network. There he is. Also has the newsletter open for business to Big 12 fans. Some 3,000 subscribers for that. Joins us on 365 Sports. We have a lot of ways to go. Let's start with Jerome, Tang, and K-State, though, John. They were dead in the water. I saw them. They lost a game here where they just let it slip away. They were close. They had played Kansas pretty well, but they just weren't winning games. What's the difference now?
Yeah, well, appreciate you having me on. That really was like kind of teetering right on the edge of them getting things turned around. They had started to play better. Really, I guess it started against Texas Tech on, I think it was like a week before that, where a game where they probably should have won, but Jerome Tang was sending one last message to Doug McDaniel where he didn't play him the last like 7 or 8 minutes of the game. K-State scored literally 4 points in the final 5 minutes. Texas Tech went on, or didn't score for the final 5 minutes. Texas Tech went on a 4-0 run, as ridiculous as that sounds, to win the game in the final 5 minutes, or else K-State could have won that game against Tech. And you add that to what they've been doing lately, it's crazy what the resume could actually be. But that's been really a lot of the issue. Like, they could not get Doug McDaniel on board this entire year. He was the guy that they built their transfer class around, a very dynamic point guard, but a guy who had some behavioral issues at Michigan, pretty well documented, and they were taking a chance with that, and he just couldn't get on the same page with them. They couldn't get him to play hard, play engaged, and I mean, there were times this year, like, it just looked like he wanted to be anywhere but actually out there on the floor. He was not playing for an entire game. He was going in and out of the starting lineup, and it just felt like that was there were a lot of problems. They couldn't get the pieces to fit in general, but when your point guard, your leader, like head of the snake sort of thing is not engaged, it just everything trickled down from that, and they just couldn't figure it out. And by the time they lost to Texas Tech, like, you're talking about double-digit losses on the season. It feels like a completely lost season at that point. And so we all kind of roll our eyes, like, all right, they played David Castillo down the stretch, a freshman who's talented but just is not ready. He's a bit overwhelmed out there right now, and it showed. And you just thought, like, hey, okay, at least they're just going to play the guy that really cares and try and develop for next year. That's fine. At that point, I had just thought this season's a lost cause. Doug McDaniel's a lost cause. Move on. But whatever happened there seemed to work. And Jerome Tang, I was at the Kansas game on Saturday. He said in the post-game press conference that they both have come a long way in their relationship, and that Doug has realized, hey, Coach Tang is not really trying to hurt me. He's actually trying to help me. And Jerome Tang has learned to be a little bit more forgiving of some things with Doug. Like, hey, he's not trying to disrespect me here. He's really trying to learn and do the things we're telling him to do. And so that has made a huge difference. And he has played like a man possessed. I mean, he was incredible against Kansas. He had 11 assists, 3 turnovers to go along with his 15 points. The 3 turnovers all came in the last 2 minutes, when it seemed like the officiating crew just wanted to get out of there. They weren't calling fouls as K-State got a little bit sloppy at the end of the game. He's just been incredible. And going along with Coleman Hawkins, who, as much crap as he's taken the entire year, has been a total, and this is what it is now, professional the entire way. He's given K-State professional efforts and has been a really good player. He just didn't have much help. Now he does. Those two are leading the charge. David Gasson, who, again, is another guy that gives you a really professional effort, has actually been around the program for 3 years now, one of the few guys in college basketball these days that sticks around that long. He's a Big 12 player of the week right now. He had 20 against Kansas. So that three-headed monster, now the role guys are really feeding off of that. And they're just getting incredible play from their starting five. Like Bart Torvik, over the last 3 weeks, the last 5 games that K-State's played, this winning streak, Bart Torvik says analytically K-State is the best team in the country over the last 3 weeks, which is insane. I mean, this team was 7-11 at one point. So the problem is they just have zero margin for error with the tournament. But it all starts with Doug McDaniel, and all the pieces have now locked into place because of that.
Yeah, I mean, like everything that could have gone wrong before. I mean, like when you build teams out of the portal, you're trying to mix. You're like Mr. Wizard, just throwing things in, the beakers and hoping it doesn't explode. And you thought you were going to have Accor, not with the team, right? Doug McDaniel essentially wasn't with the team, like you just said, and it just took a long time. But do they have to win like win the tournament in your opinion, or can they get there before that?
Well, I think they can get there without it because, I mean, they're up to, I'm trying to get these all mixed up. I mean, Ken Palm, they're top 60. I think Bart Torvik, they may be up to like 45, if I have that correct. And then the net, I mean, I think it still is maybe in like the 70s. So, I mean, they definitely have work to do. But look, they play Arizona tomorrow. Arizona's like a 3.5-point favorite, I think. It'll be a home game. They win that. If you go 6-2 down the stretch, I think is kind of what among K-State circles has been discussed here. If you can get to 6-2 down the stretch, you put yourself in the real at-large conversation. I would think these things should not matter, but I would think the fact that you have Coleman Hawkins and Jerome Tang, two guys who have been pretty visible among college basketball over the last few years, would help you a little bit in that regard. You've been playing so well and would be finishing red hot and are playing a really exciting brand of basketball that probably helps you. So I think they can do it, but it's just like, what is the margin for error? You know, when do you hit a wall, which I would imagine is probably coming. I guess you could tell me, hey, you know, they hit their wall for literally over half the season and they've gotten through that. But I don't know, even when you have a good team, like I can remember the team that went to the Elite Eight a couple of years ago, had a really good start to conference play. Eventually, you know, halfway through conference play, they hit a wall. They had a couple bad losses at Oklahoma and Texas Tech, who weren't great that year. And it was like, man, what's going on with this team? And then they turned it back on. This team just doesn't really have that luxury right now. Like, they got to continue playing at this level. If you lose to Arizona, which is obviously going to be a really tough game, then they're going to BYU right after that. And like, that is not an easy place to win at all. I think, in fact, I might give them a better chance to beat Arizona. It's nothing against Arizona. It's just, it's so tough to go out there and play in Provo. Got a road trip to Utah after that. I mean, like, theoretically, it looks like the schedule lightens up a bit for them after Arizona, but I think when you really dive into it, they're all going to be tough. You know, they went to Arizona State last week and fell behind 15-0 and then came back and won by 1. They can't be doing a whole lot of that. So it's a shame because, like I said, this team, if you bottle up what they've been the last 5 games, I mean, they're a top 15 team in the country, no doubt in my mind, the way that they're playing right now. But they cannot screw any of it up down the stretch. They've got to keep doing this or it will take winning the Big 12 tournament.
Yeah, I don't know how many games, and if they play 1 or 2 games in the tournament or go deeper than that, but if they have a record inside the Big 12, which is really close, if they end up with 10-8, something like that, no matter their overall schedule, that's going to be fun to kind of watch in many different ways. John, your thoughts, the Big 12, after all the smoke is cleared, the season, the playoff, we know the teams that made a run at it and those that were disappointing. What are your thoughts about this coming season with so much that can happen between now and they start practicing in August?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I feel, honestly, thanks in large part to Arizona State and to a lesser extent, like BYU, what they did in their bowl game too. Like, I feel better about the Big 12's place nationally at the table. You know, it's interesting. I was just reading Pat Forty had written an article actually where the thesis was talking about ACC basketball and, hey, they may have a real problem on their hands with what ACC basketball has turned into. But he made a comment about the more overall big picture and said something to the effect of like, hey, you know, the ACC is in better position than the Big 12 right now, and just kind of said that like it was an objective fact. And I was like, well, I mean, look, this was in relation, of course, to ESPN picking up the option on that TV contract. But I thought, you know, if you're talking brands, like, okay, obviously, I mean, Clemson, Florida State, Miami, North Carolina, honestly, those are all better brands than anything that you have in the Big 12 right now. So I get it. But if you look at what happened actually on the field last year, even though at one point people were talking about, wow, is the Big 12 going to get shut out of the playoff? At the end of the day, Arizona State was within one play, you know, a 4th and 13 stop or a correct targeting call going their way from beating Texas and getting to the semifinal of the college football playoff, which was a phenomenal showing and I think earned you a lot of respect. Meanwhile, SMU got blasted and Clemson played the same Texas team and was somewhat competitive, but not nearly as much so as Arizona State. And that was the ACC champ, Miami winds up missing out on the college football playoff, kind of stubbed their toe there at the end. So I think you look at it and say, and then BYU, right? BYU wins that game and kind of validates like, oh, maybe we should have actually been talking about them when their resume absolutely warranted way more discussion than they got for the playoff at large, that last spot. I'm not saying necessarily they should have gotten it, but they should have been right there. They should have been a part of the national discourse. And I think you take all that into consideration and say, man, the Big 12 had a better year than people really thought. The problem with that is like, how does it translate to next year, man? I don't know, because if you take what we were saying at this time last year about what we expected the Big 12 to be, all of it was flipped almost completely on its head, right? We've all seen the graphic over and over now about the top of the Big 12 standings and where everybody actually finished, Utah with a terrible year, Oklahoma State with a terrible year, BYU and Arizona State coming out of nowhere. Like, I do get the feeling that this year kind of gave us a preview of what may happen on a year-to-year basis. And then how much does that hurt? Because I do think there really is something to, had the Big 12, had all those teams, like I was just talking about BYU, had all those teams involved, instead of being Arizona State, BYU, Iowa State, been Oklahoma State, K-State, Utah last year, because a little bit more brand equity recently, and just the teams that everybody thought were going to be good and started the year highly ranked. I think it probably is a little bit of a different discussion. So it could become an issue if everything's just totally jumbled year in, year out. But I don't know. You throw in like Texas Tech doing a really good job in the portal. I think that helps. They generated a lot of national headlines for that, and people should have more respect for them going into the year because of that. I really like what Utah did in the portal, and I think they're always going to have a defense. That's a candidate to me to rebound in a pretty big way this upcoming year. So I still think the Big 12 can have a similar type of season. Of course, it'll always just come down to like, how much respect do you actually get when it comes to fighting for the playoff, and just from a narrative battle nationally, what kind of respect level will you get?
John, Connor Riley off to be the Cowboys offensive line coach. I'm very intrigued by that move on the Cowboys part. I know that his play calling left a little to be desired for Wildcat fans. What do you think about the elevation of Matt Wells, who's just resume-wise been wildly more successful than Connor Riley in that regard?
Yeah, well, first of all, congratulations to Connor Riley. I really like him. He is a great, great guy, and he's been an excellent offensive line coach. I don't think any K-State fans, I think, had this interesting reaction like, whoa, okay, how do I feel about this? Because there was a lot of frustration about him as an offensive coordinator, but he had pretty universal respect as a really good offensive line coach. Mm-hmm. And so now you're like, okay, how do we feel about this? I think a lot of the replacements are going to come in-house, as you've seen already, obviously, with Matt Wells getting the bump up to offensive coordinator. That I'm excited by, and I think the word on the street seems to be the players are definitely excited about that. I think Avery Johnson is very on board with that. He and Jace Brown and Dylan Edwards are very quick to share that on their Instagram stories when that broke out, however much stock you put into something like that. But it seems like coming out of the building, there are a lot of people excited about Matt Wells taking over. He obviously has a track record. I know Texas Tech fans, they've kind of made fun of the Matt Wells thing the whole time. I always have to remind them, like, this is not Matt Wells, the head coach. This is, hey, Matt Wells, coordinated offense, worry about an offense. And so I'm optimistic about that. I will be interested to see what they do. The thing that is most concerning, I think, to me, I'm like, Matt Wells has so much experience. I'm like, I think there's a pretty high floor there with the offense. We can debate what the ceiling would be, but I think there's a pretty high floor with the offense. Concern is you're going to be replacing a lot on the offensive line again. They had a really good portal class with offensive linemen, particularly tackles. And so I think K-State fans are like, okay, there are enough talent, enough bodies here. Give it to Connor Riley. He'll figure it out. He's been such a proven guy on the offensive line. And now it's like, okay, what are you going to do? There's been some talk, speculation about would they move Brian LePack from tight ends to offensive line. I think he's a real up-and-coming star in the coaching business. He's a guy that's going to be moving up the ladder, and so is that the better way to utilize him? And then you can move like a Drew Little up from assistant offensive line to the tight ends. He's a guy that has some tight end experience. But even if you do think this guy's a really bright offensive mind, and if that is the move, how ready is he to take over day one in what's a big year, right? I mean, you can't be wasting years with Avery Johnson, and especially in the portal when you're spending a lot, resources, capital, everything on the tackles that you're bringing in here that you need to step in right away. Like, do you have somebody that will be able to take that on? And I think that's really where I have the question mark. You know that at K-State, everything is going to be predicated on the running game and the offensive line, and you've got some incredible weapons to utilize in the backfield between Dylan Edwards, Avery Johnson, and then even Joe Jackson, who I think is going to be a really good running back too. But they need those guys up front to get it done. And it's always been something pretty rock solid that you can rely on to have Connor Riley there. And so that will be new uncharted territory for K-State this spring and throughout the offseason.
John, I think you've covered pretty much everything K-State. I just want to know how you doing after last night, pal. I know that was tough.
I was going to say, I almost said I'm glad the first question wasn't about the Super Bowl. I popped on here and saw that yeah. I saw that was in the the slug for the title of the show, and I was like, oh man. No, look, it's weird. I really wasn't, and maybe it's like as a Chiefs fan, I'm so conditioned to these close games, and for once, I wasn't really having to sweat anything out. And I was just sitting there thinking, like, man, I don't know. I had like more gratitude than anything, as weird as that is. It was not like this rage. It was not this like stress or anything like that. I was like, man, look, it sucks. I would have loved for them to win 3 straight and the 3-peat and all that. And, I get annoyed with some of the narratives that form about the team, whether it's the refs or the, Pat versus Tom Brady comparisons and all of that. And I knew what's coming. Like, people have been just waiting, frothing for this for the last 3 years to come in with those takes. He's not that good, or it is just rep. And so I knew what's coming. I'm avoiding a lot of that today. But I don't know. My biggest sense was I was just like, dude, I grew up. I mean, I shared the story on Twitter. Like, I can remember road tripping from Manhattan, driving over 2 hours to get to Chiefs training camp, standing in line in the heat just to watch Jonathan Baldwin, who they had just drafted a receiver, because I was so excited to get a look at Jonathan Baldwin, and then that's before like the 2012 season where they win like 2 games and you have the tragic like Javon Belcher thing in the parking lot. Like, man, like I grew up going to like Marty Schottenheimer playoff games and they could never get over the hump. And I, stand out there in the cold with my aunt and family and just watch these bitter disappointments. Never in the world did I think I would watch my team win a title, let alone, the Royals and all this. And between the two, I've seen them win 4 championships in the last 10 years. So don't cry for me. Don't feel too bad for me. We're doing okay in Kansas City. The sun came up today.
Yeah, I have a very good friend who's a Chiefs fan, and we have a group text, and he didn't complain once during the game. And you know why? It's because a couple weeks ago, he was mad about like Andy Reid getting too cute with the play calling, and literally the next 4 texts were, you don't get to complain about play calling. You don't get to complain about play calling. No. You can complain when things are actually bad. So, no, yeah. I appreciate that sentiment, John. I wish more sports fans were mature like you are.
Well, I'm not saying I'm always mature.
No.
It was a moment of maturity yesterday, at least, where I was like, I'd kind of prepared myself for it in the Buffalo game, because there were moments in that game where I was kind of like, oh boy, this feels like it might just be done. So I had been emotionally prepared for the moment for a while. And as much as I love the Chiefs, I mean, if I am being totally honest about it, love them. But my first love is K-State. My first love is college sports, college football. So I might be a little bit less mature sometimes when it comes to the college sports angle of it than I am with the Chiefs.
Yeah, you have now won 3 of 5 that they've been in.
Let's see. Yeah, like that 2019, 2020, and then the last 2. Yeah.
And there's still what is a large chunk of teams that have never even played in the Super Bowl, much like there's 4, and like 10, 12 or so teams that have never won it. It's
well, I think it's also good for Kansas City fans. They know that's not their last one. there's more that are coming. I mean, you don't get too far ahead of yourself, but I think you can all feel pretty confident about that with number 15 back there. So, yeah, tough night for Chiefs fans, but love the way that you're handling it, John. We appreciate you as always, man.
Yeah, hey, appreciate you guys. The one thing that sucks about it is I was like, man, this is just flashbacks to that Tampa Super Bowl. I was like, can it be someone other than the offensive line?
No,
now you're gonna get me going too much. I guess
I was there at that game, and I brought that up. He never had a chance in that game either. It wasn't a high-scoring game, but Tampa Bay's defense was in his grill. And no matter who you are, including Patrick Mahomes, if you don't have a little bit of time, you start to get a little bit jittery yourself. Got hit in the leg one time when he threw one pick. But thanks, man. Appreciate your time. Good to have you on the show and all your perspective on many things, Big 12 and also with the K-State. And, again, open for business. You go to his Twitter feed. You can go to John Kurtz Open for Business to get that newsletter in your inbox occasionally. I think it's once or twice, 3 times per week. So there we are with that.